Now, the Nevada ranchers, they pay their taxes, they pay their fees, and they follow the law. That's the way it should be. Now, what about Cliven Bundy? Cliven Bundy does not recognize the United States. He says that the United States is a foreign government. He doesn't pay his taxes. He doesn't pay his fees, unlike the rest of the Nevada ranchers. And he doesn't follow the law. There are 2 court orders that have directed him to get your cattle off the land. And one of them was one of the orders was written by Lloyd George, who is really one of the most thoughtful, considerate people in the country. He has exhausted his ability to go to court, but now he continues to thumb his nose at authority. I think that we have to put this in the proper perspective. I've spoken to Sheriff Gillespie in detail. I've spoken to the Attorney General, Eric Holder, in detail. I've spoken to James Comey, the head of the FBI, in detail. Talked to him yesterday. I've talked to the Secretary of Interior yesterday. And it's an issue that we cannot let go and just walk away from it. Keep in mind what happened up there. There were hundreds of people from around the country that came there. They had sniper rifles on the freeway. They had assault weapons. They had automatic weapons. And as one of the former sheriffs from Arizona said, and we had children and women lined up because if anybody got hurt, we wanted to make sure they got hurt first because we wanted the federal government hurting women and children. This is the deal, and it's not a good one. So these people who hold themselves out to be patriots are not. They're nothing more than domestic terrorists. And I think that we are a country that people should follow the law. And what went up in Mesquite is not very good. I repeat, what went on up there is domestic tourism. Okay, domestic terrorism, not tourism.
Hey guys, Dabu7. Little bit of information I think that most of you Bundy supporters especially should know about. Anyone following the situation down there. You guys heard Harry Reid run his mouth. You heard Cliven Bundy speak freely, and you watched the media twist his words into where he was pretty much a racist. As soon as we caught them and called them out, the whole thing seemed to die down and go away. Well, people don't just go away. Just like the guys don't go away from the Bundy Ranch, they're still down there packed up. And they're ready to do whatever it takes to defend what they're calling the Bundy Ranch. Now, what you're looking at here are plots of land right next to the Bundy Ranch. And guess who owns them? You guessed it. Harry Reid. Now, what's the odds of that? What are the odds that this man at the forefront of this whole thing, calling all these people terrorists and all this other stuff, has land right next to the Bundy Ranch? 93 acres. Now you know. I'll leave a link in the description box so you guys can tear it apart. But that is one of the key reasons for the whole thing going down with the Bundy Ranch. Harry Reid is being paid. Not only does he own land in this area, but I can guarantee you the land that he owns in this area isn't for his wanting to farm and purposes, okay? This is strategic to run everyone else in the area out, buy up the land, and then they can sell the whole thing out to who? Who's already got rights in there? Who's already got contracts? Who were they in debt to? Spin Dabu 7. Eyes open.
Lou Dobbs tonight.
Good evening, everybody. A dramatic withdrawal by the federal government after meeting armed and determined resistance by Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, his family, friends, hundreds of supporters from neighboring states. But this is more than a simple story of a Western rancher standing up against an abuse of power and use of overwhelming force by the federal government. And it's certainly not about the federal government's stewardship of Western lands and the preservation of wildlife on the high desert. In this instance, merely doing what it must to protect a tortoise, one it turns out isn't endangered, and one which the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has admitted to euthanizing. The cowboys in Freedom won this weekend, and the coercive and overreaching federal bureaucrats were forced to turn tail. Why has the most powerful man in the United States Senate, however, Majority Leader Harry Reid and his son Rory, who failed in a bid for the Nevada governorship, involved themselves in this effort to crush one individual citizen? There are reports tonight that Chinese energy giant ENN Energy Group is actively targeting the land in question for a solar plant project, with Roy Reid's help. And the principal director of the Bureau of Federal Land Management, the bureaucracy at the center of this conflict, is Harry Reid's former senior policy advisor. We turn now to Fox News correspondent William LaJeunesse, live on the ground in Bunkerville, Nevada, with the latest for us. William.
The Bureau of Land Management's problems began Thursday after this video hit YouTube. Reaction was swift. Self-described patriots and hundreds of armed militia members began streaming into Bunkerville, Nevada.
We care about our country, we care about our land, we care about our fellow countrymen.
Answering the call of 67-year-old Cliven Bundy.
Get the hell out of here, federal government.
Bundy's family has ranched here since the 1880s, giving him grazing rights he claims predate and preempt federal authority established here in 1934.
Our United States government thinks they can rule in a state of Nevada, Clark County, with unlimited power.
So in 1994, when BLM listed the desert tortoise as endangered and withdrew his grazing rights, Bundy refused to comply, losing court appeals 3 times. Last week, federal agents executed a court order, rounding up nearly 400 cows. That's when things got heated. Bundy supporters closed a freeway and attempted to free his cattle from federal holding pens, using 36 cowboys on horseback, backed up by militia in firing positions.
You read the Second Amendment, it's not just about guns. It starts out a well-regulated militia for the security of a free state. Is that not what happened yesterday?
After a 30-minute standoff, the feds released the cows.
Those cattle are ours. They're Cliven Bundy's family's cattle, and they stole them from us.
The roundup by helicopter separated day-old calves from their mothers. 18 orphans as of Monday.
They were drawn up. They were obviously they hadn't had any milk to drink from their mothers in several days.
I'm not willing to pay the feds.
As the last rancher in Clark County, Bundy claims the feds are using the tortoise as a ruse to force he and others off public land to make room for the Dry Lake Solar Zone, adjacent to Bundy's grazeland. Critics call it more than a coincidence. The new BLM director is a former policy advisor to Senator Harry Reid. And Reid endorsed the judge who originally ruled against Bundy for a seat on the U.S. Supreme Court. While Reid's son, Rory, is a lobbyist for a Chinese energy giant, ENN, which proposed building a $5 million solar plant in Clark County. So here's the irony. Turtles and solar also don't mix, according to environmentalists who are suing the BLM for approving solar permits in tortoise habitats, threatening the very species they're claiming to try to save. Now, the BLM still considers Bundy an outlaw and a deadbeat and say they will go after him in the courts. Now, Senator Harry Reid said late today that this is not over and that Cliven Bundy should not be permitted to break the law. Lou?
William, thank you very much. And of course, no one, whether they hold elected office or are private citizens, should be above the law. Our first guest tonight says rancher Cliven Bundy's problem isn't that he didn't pay user fees or fines. It has nothing to do with whether his cattle were bothering tortoises. It's simply that he's not a Harry Reid donor. Joining us tonight, Dana Loesch, conservative radio talk show host, anchor of The Dana Show on the Blaze TV network. Dana, good to have you with us. You've been following
Thanks for having me, Lou.
You've been following this story. I mean, these relationships amongst Senator Reid, his son Rory, the federal government, even Governor Sandoval has been to China to glad hand with the ENN Group's executives. What is going on here?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it, Lou? If there wasn't this sort of incestuous relationship between all of these donors and these individuals that had worked with Senator Reid, I think it would be fair to say that there's probably nothing going on here. But unfortunately, there's precedence which states otherwise. We know for a fact that there are a number of projects of Harry Reid donors that have received the golden stamp of approval from the Bureau of Land Management in this same particular area. One of those, and I gave example of that on air, was Harvey Whitmore, and this guy was convicted of illegal campaign contributions by the tens of thousands of dollars to Harry Reid. He had a development that was in this same area. The tortoise, that desert tortoise, was in the way, and very conveniently, Senator Harry Reid, after he reportedly approached the senator, the Bureau of Land Management just very conveniently moved the boundary lines of the tortoise habitat to better accommodate Harvey Whitmore, who again was convicted of illegal campaign contributions to Senator Harry Reid. So there, you have to ask the question. The law is the law, and I think we all agree on that, but it needs to be consistently applied, because what is the law if it is inconsistently applied? And what is the law as well if this is a law that is sort of based upon a bastardization of what constitutional law and what state law is dictating regarding private property? And so these are all questions that are finally coming up, because it's not just Nevada, Lou. There's this situation that's unfolding in New Mexico. We have a situation about private property in Colorado. We're seeing the same thing in Utah. Right. It really is kind of the battle of the West.
It is a battle of the West, a classic struggle. And what we're also watching here is, without question whatsoever, when you bring 200 federal agents and law enforcement agents up against one man and what turns out to be more than a few hundred of his friends, but they started out with a ratio of 200 to 1, and that is just repulsive, repugnant as it can be for any American, whether they live in Nevada or New York City.
Yeah, very heavy-handed indeed, and I don't know why it wasn't left up to state and local law enforcement for them to handle this. And they say that Bundy, who, and I've spoken with Clive Bundy, and he says that he stopped paying fees to the Bureau of Land Management and only wanted to pay the county after they were essentially using his money against him to wage a terror of running him and these other ranchers out, which they succeeded with everyone else. It's this punitive regulation that they're enforcing on everyone. But you raise a good point in that how much did it cost, do you think, for 200 agents and for helicopters to stampede these cattle into holding areas? They say he owes them $1 million in fees. Well, I think they've spent probably a couple $1 million on this operation. Yeah,
the most recent number I saw was over $3 million, which makes no sense, except until you realize the new head of the Bureau of Land Management is Harry Reid's former senior policy advisor. The incestuous interrelationships here seem to speak of something much larger and, frankly, potentially sinister beyond simply a government trying to crush one citizen, as if that weren't enough.
Right.
Where do you think we go from here?
Well, it's going to end up in the courts. It was curious that Senator Harry Reid just now, later today, as you reported, finally mentioned that, well, this isn't over. You can't have individuals just sort of ignoring the law. Well, that's interesting, because then it comes back to consistency, Lou. You have people who've donated to Harry Reid who've been inconsistent in following this law. So it will be left up to the courts, and it opens up this big battle as to what the Bureau of Land Management's role is. Is this going to be something managed that's owned by the state, managed by a federal entity? And that's what the fight's going to be about. With over 84% of Nevada owned by the federal government right now, I think that we're going to be seeing this battle go on for a long time.
Dana, thank you so much. Dana Lash, we appreciate it.
Don't mind the wiggling on the phone, but it's Deputy Sheriff Lombardo when he was running for sheriff, and they're interviewing him, and this part of the interview is very interesting, and when you're done watching this, I want you to ask yourself, why is my husband Jerry DeLamus in jail? I don't understand it. All right, let's see if this works.
Welcome back. Jeff Gillen with Amy Tarkanian, Rory Reid. This is Assistant Sheriff Joe Lombardo. This is Sheriff Week. We're talking to the candidates for Metro Sheriff. Real quick, there's been a lot in the news. I'm going to talk about Bunkerville and the Bundy situation. Do you think it's time that we move the militia out of Bunkerville?
No. Well, first of all, let me put it this way. How can we move the militia out?
I don't know.
You know, is it a violation of the First Amendment by moving them? They're on private property, okay? The property owners is giving them the ability to be there. They're not violating any laws associated with their beliefs. So where's the authority come from to remove them outside of their constitutional rights?
And what do you say, because we've been getting reports, and Congressman Horsford said, look, residents have complained to him. They're uneasy with the militia members up there and that type of thing. There were some reports, although that's been disputed, that there were checkpoints up in Bunkerville and that type of thing. So what you're saying is, look, there's really no legal foundation at this point to really move them out because they're not doing anything illegal.
Exactly. You know, those reports were brought forward to Doug Gillespie, and we were tasked with researching those complaints.
So you've conducted an investigation?
Yes. I wouldn't classify it as investigation. We did some surveillance and research, and you know, put our eyes on the subject matter and determined there wasn't any violations.
And Harriet Myers composed a longer list of individuals that they were recommending to be replaced. You actually only replaced a smaller portion of that list. whom were all Republican. Why do you think Democrats made such a big political issue of it? And after the Inspector General's office found no evidence of criminal wrongdoing, did any of the politicians apologize to you?
My wife would really like to answer this question. You know, when I became Attorney General, I was asked by Harriet Miers, who had succeeded me as White House counsel, about the possibility of replacing all the U.S. attorneys. They're political appointees. They serve for a term of 4 years. They can be removed by statute at the president's pleasure. And obviously at the beginning of a second term, you look at rewarding certain people and bring them into the administration, bring in new blood, get rid of some of the people that hadn't done, quite frankly, as good a job as we had hoped. And so I directed my senior team to do an evaluation, performance evaluation of U.S. attorneys. Unfortunately, it was a process that took way too long because by the time that it had been completed, I had made the decision to remove, I think it was 7 U.S. attorneys in December of 2006. The Democrats had won control, I think, of the Senate, maybe not the House. But I made the decision to remove these 7 because my team recommended it, and we felt this was the best thing to do for the department. Well, probably within 2 months, this became a huge political firestorm. The Democrats were saying that these had been removed for political reasons, improper political reasons. And it is true that Senator Pryor from Arkansas went on the Senate floor, called me a liar. Of course, Congress did all kinds of investigations. The Inspector General did multiple investigations, and in the end, it was all about nothing. I think of the 7, the Inspector General found that 2 had been engaged in gross mismanagement of their office, so they had to go. The one from San Diego had been insubordinate. She didn't care about gun prosecutions or immigration prosecutions, and this is in a border district. We had a U.S. attorney who was engaged in self-dealing in Washington, so that person had to go. The U.S. attorney in Arizona tried to implement an interrogation policy that would bind the country nationwide, the Department of Justice nationwide, so he was unsubordinate. So that the Inspector General of the 7 found 5 very legitimate, strong reasons that should go. One from Nevada, the Inspector General really couldn't find a legitimate reason why he should go, but couldn't find an illegitimate reason, no improper reason. And then finally, the most troubling one was a gentleman out of New Mexico. And at the end of the day, the Inspector General found no evidence of wrongdoing because it involved possibly the White House. General McCasey, my successor as the Attorney General, appointed a special prosecutor. The special prosecutor then investigated the White House, and again, the conclusion was no finding of anything improper. So at the end of the day, I'd say probably about 99% of it was pure political.
But did Senator Pryor or any of these individuals, which some of them said really, really awful things, had such distinguished service, etc., and as I previously said, they were all Republican appointees. Did any of them apologize to you after such a thing?
No, and that's part of the problem in Washington as far as I'm concerned. Public service should not be this hard. I think it's fair to be criticized for what you actually do. That's perfectly legitimate. I think if there are questions that are raised, it's perfectly legitimate to do an investigation, to look into things. But this was a political act, in my judgment, and I think it stems from a number of reasons. One, by this time, I think the Iraq War was not as popular. President Bush was not as popular. Democrats had now won control, and they were anxious to somehow they wanted to flex their muscles, and they couldn't take down the president, so they went after someone who was viewed as a close friend of the president. And I think that was part of it, quite frankly.
name is Ammon Bundy. I am speaking to you today from inside a maximum security jail. I am the son of a Nevada cattle rancher. My father, brothers, and myself have been incarcerated for many months, leaving our wives and 26 children altogether without fathers to care for them. I ask that you listen to our story and judge us. Yes, judge us. Ask yourself if we were justified in standing for our ranch and the rights of our neighbors. Or should we have just let federal agencies take our heritage? Ask yourself, what would have you done? Ask yourself what is right. Let me explain our story. My brothers and I grew up on a family cattle ranch in southern Nevada, established by our great-great-grandfathers in 1877. We were raised in humble circumstances in the same little ranch home as our father, Cliven Bundy, built by my grandfather Dave in the 1940s. For 5 generations, our family has run cattle along the Bunkerville Mountains. Our ancestors were the first pioneers to settle in the southern Nevada desert. They carved their living out of leveling and farming land next to the Virgin River and ran cattle on the hills. Their homesteads were established before Las Vegas had even one person living in it. Nevada had only been a state for 13 years. Discovering multiple springs on the foothills of the mountains, our forefathers began to build water troughs and holding tanks to supply water for cattle. This made it so the cattle did not have to travel too far for water. In the arid desert where a ranch is, it takes approximately 100 acres to feed one cow. In his lifetime, my father has improved upon this watering system by installing pipes throughout the lower hills from 11 different water sources over a 30-mile span. This has allowed the cattle to benefit from feed in areas where otherwise they could not live because they would have to walk too far for water. This has also greatly benefited the desert wildlife and made hunting and camping plentiful. As a true environmentalist, my father, by expanding the water system and caring for the land and the road, has tremendously promoted wildlife, increased game, improved camping, and generally made the area more enjoyable to be on. Even the desert tortoise would thank Cliven Bundy for the water close by if they could speak. All of this is done at my father's expense and effort, costing the taxpayers nothing. With his banged-up Dodge pickup, my father would spend many days a month blowing out the water lines with air and repairing the leaks, making sure each water tank was always full. My family has brought life to the southern Nevada desert for over 100 years. Imagine what would happen to all the wildlife if this watering system was not maintained or if it was destroyed. Before I move on, it is important that you have a little more background about the legality of our water and grazing rights. In 1890, the state of Nevada created a registry so that ranchers and others could deed their water and grazing rights. In Nevada, as with other western states, the livestock water rights include title to graze. Each deed in print designates how many cattle the owner of the deed is typically grazing around the water. This is the way grazing rights are recorded and protected by the state of Nevada. Just to be clear, these livestock grazing and water rights are vested property, much like mineral rights or deeded rights to your home. These grazing rights are real property. They can be sold, traded, borrowed against, or adversely taken. They are the lifeblood of our ranch and are a valued heritage to our family. Many people have desired to purchase them over the years, but my father has chosen to remain raising cattle in the desert. Without these stock water grazing rights, our ranch has almost no value. My father owns 11 of these stock water grazing rights, deeded with the state of Nevada. In the early 1990s, the Bureau of Land Management, also known as the BLM, an agency of the executive branch, tried to trespass my father for grazing cattle on our deeded range, where my family has run cattle for 138 years. The BLM adopted an extreme environmental no-cattle policy designed to remove all ranching from the land. On the wall in the Southern Nevada BLM district office, they displayed their motto. It read, "No moo by 92, cattle free by 93. Seeing their intent to destroy his ranch, my father stood on the fact that his ranch was inside the boundaries of the state of Nevada, that the federal agencies are violating the constituted laws between the state and the federal government. and that he owns a deeded right to graze and water his cattle, established over a century ago. When agents from the Bureau of Land Management told my father that the federal government does not recognize his grazing rights and that my father must remove his cattle, he told them that they had no authority to take his family's heritage away. When they said they were going to take it away anyway, he said no, and then he said hell no. Several times the Bureau of Land Management tried to drag my father into federal court so they could strip him of his rights, like they have done with thousands of others. Being land inside the state of Nevada, not ceded to the federal government, my father held the constitutional position that federal agencies have no legal constituted authority to administer the land inside the state, and therefore no jurisdiction to trespass or prosecute him. Watching other ranchers, miners, loggers try to defend themselves in federal court when the federal government was the plaintiff, my father often said, going into federal court to defend yourself against federal agencies is like as if a man broke into your home and beat up your wife and children. So to get justice, you take him to court. When they say all arise to the honorable judge, in walks a man in a black robe, and he is the very man that assaulted your wife and children. Of over 100,000 cases in the western states where the federal government is the plaintiff in federal court, federal judges have sided with federal agencies every single time, taking century-old vested property rights away from good, hard-working families. In our area, my dad is the last rancher out of 53. In the state of Nevada alone, federal agencies have taken 5,072 water rights from the people and deeded them to themselves. It is astonishing to think about this when the United States Constitution was specifically designed to prohibit this very thing from happening. We the people have ignorantly allowed federal agencies of the executive branch to be modern-day conquerors, gobbling up our land and resources and inserting themselves into every facet of our lives. Our homes, our schools, our churches, our jobs, our industries, our manufacturing industries, our housing industries, our agricultural industries, our mineral industries, our financial industries. Everywhere there is wealth, they seek to control and take. They will not stop expanding and growing on their own. They will not limit themselves because they do not produce a product. In order for them to survive and gain and grow, they must take from the people who produce a product. The judicial branch of government, the courts and the judges, have not been an effective check and balance to these agencies for over 60 years, giving them a free pass to prey upon the wealth of the American people. U.S. Congress has tried to stop them twice in the last decade by defunding them. We saw through this that the executive agencies are too powerful for even the United States Congress to limit. So how did people come to know about the Bundy family, my family? Well, in April 2014, the BLM joined forces with 4 other federal agencies to enforce their unlawful trespass and destroy our ranch. They set up a massive military-like compound on the range. With 200 hired guns, mercenaries, they surrounded our ranch and put it under siege. They began to brutally round up our cattle with helicopters, running them to death, shooting them from the air, and leaving the newborn cows out on the range to thirst to death or to be eaten by coyotes. The dead cattle were dumped into mass graves dug by federal backhoes. They also began destroying the water infrastructure that had been established over 100 years ago. Our family was threatened by BLM personnel that said, if we resisted in any way, this would be another Waco or Ruby Ridge. Knowing beforehand the abuses that they were about to cause would bring public outcry, the BLM built 2 First Amendment areas in non-conspicuous places and threatened the public with arrest and federal charges if anyone protested outside these areas. Our family, friends, and other local people began to protest first. They insisted not to have their First Amendment rights corralled and refused to protest in these remote, designated areas. With hired snipers on the hills, federal agents began to gang beat protesters for filming their abusive actions. For several days, they body slammed us to the asphalt, sicked dogs on us, tased us, and threatened to open fire on us for protesting on what they said was their property, even next to State Highway 170. With guns to our heads and our children's heads, Federal agents said that the road belonged to the state, but the earth under it belonged to them. Much of this abuse was caught on video and was posted on the internet. Within hours, millions had viewed the gross actions of these federal agencies. People from all over the United States began flowing to the ranch. That Saturday, thousands had assembled and demanded the Clark County Sheriff Department and the state governor to do their jobs in protecting the people from out-of-control federal agencies. The Clark County Sheriff's Department finally stepped in and ended the abuse. All federal agents left the area within an hour, and the surviving cattle were brought back to the ranch to be doctored or turned out on the range, and then we went back to ranching. This infuriated the bureaucrats, people such as Harry Reid, who has personally made millions off land deals with the Bureau of Land Management, publicly came out against our family and the people that stood up to them, calling us domestic terrorists, threatening that this was not over. Many of us wore name tags that read, "Hi, my name is so-and-so, and I'm a domestic terrorist." Great-grandmothers, little children, and everyone in between wore them proudly. Since then, federal agencies have mounted a continual media campaign to demonize my family and those that stood against their horrific actions. In defense, we've had to respond by publishing the truth. My mother, sisters, and many of our friends and family have done the best we could to stop them from controlling the narrative. We knew that if they could change the public sentiment, they would once again justify forceful action against us. In an effort to make sure that this did not happen to any more families in Nevada, in early 2015, my family, along with several state representatives, entered a bill into the Nevada legislature. This bill would end the federal land grabs in the state and force the federal government to follow the Constitution to control land inside the state. Bill AB 408. It was the most publicly supported bill in the Nevada history. Despite its popularity, bureaucrats united together from within and changed the text of the bill right before it was voted on. The new text gave them more power rather than take it away. It was a full array of politics at its finest. On the last day of the House vote, we had to kill our own bill, hoping that Nevada legislatures would stand up to federal agencies and protect families like ours. We left Carson City with our heads hanging low and went back to ranching, working, and raising children. Before I go on, I need to say that even though our family is suffering great pain and sorrow right now, we do not hate or harbor anger for anyone. We pray daily and diligently for those who have and continue to harm us. We love the Lord Jesus Christ and desire in the end for all of us, even those that have spitefully put us in these jails, to find peace and happiness through His forgiveness and example. Through these great tribulations, we have strived to follow the Lord and do only as He has asked.